I'd like this hearing to be substantive and to reflect the best traditions of the Senate. However, I cannot let this moment, in commenting on the best traditions of the Senate, pass without expressing my deep regret that Chief Judge Merrick Garland was treated with profound and historic disrespect. The disrespect shown by Senate Republicans to Chief Judge Merrick Garland and to President Obama and to our institutions was unprecedented and deeply damaging.
That was Senator Coons, Democrat from Delaware, one of many Democrats still upset about how Republicans blocked President Obama's nominee just last year. But can they transfer that anger into action and do the same to President Trump's nominee? Let's bring in our panel right now. Dominic Gard, a political journalist and author, Gian-Carlo, former aide to President George H.W. Bush, and Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent, who you met earlier. Andrew, you were talking about, and we led with that soundbite, obviously Merrick Garland still hangs out there. But is this just venting and getting out of their system here? Because that doesn't seem to be reason enough to stand in the way of Gorsuch.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons Democrats are objecting to Gorsuch as strongly as they are. And certainly the Democratic base and the progressive base is livid at this nomination and the treatment of Merrick Garland. So that may be enough reason Democrats need with their base to object to the Gorsuch nomination. Of course, Democrats do not have enough votes to block this if Republicans decide to do away with the filibuster in the Senate, which I'm guessing is what will happen. There'll be enough Democratic no votes that they will not overcome the filibuster, so I think Republicans will get rid of the filibuster when it comes to this nomination.
As they say, the nuclear option. Yeah. Gian-Carlo, you have an interesting perspective on this. Your old boss picked not one but two justices, Justice Thomas, but also Justice Breyer. Now, Justice Breyer didn't turn out from Souter, excuse me. Justice Souter didn't turn out to be that conservative vote here that they would count on every time. Nobody debated both his qualifications and that he wasn't competent enough for the job. But in many ways, was that the beginning of a change where there would be no more surprises, certainly from conservative circles, because Democrats haven't been surprised too many. They put somebody on the court, They tend to vote left on social issues. Do you think that was the beginning of a change in how these justices are selected?
Well, I think everyone certainly took notice that there was something in that log cabin water in New Hampshire that changed Justice Souter's the direction of his judicial bent when he got onto the court.
They call it his growth.
His growth, exactly. And I certainly America and members of the Senate took notice. And so I think that you see a lot more probing on precedent and on an individual judge's views on a whole host of issues to try to divine the intent of the person that they are considering to vote for in the nomination. So, yeah, the answer is yes, absolutely.
Well,
I think
before
that
Judge
Souter
Gorsuch,
was a
Justice
Gorsuch
was nominated, and I don't think I can find one person who doesn't think he has the qualifications or the resume for the job. But there was always this kabuki dance where people would get up there and be like, you know, they were left or right, or at least you thought you did. And if they were smart, they'd avoid answering the questions as good as possible. It certainly didn't start with Gorsuch on this. But what was different this time around was what Trump promised in the campaign and then said again, that he checked all the boxes, that he passed the litmus test, that he got the blessing from Heritage and from the Federalist Society, whatever, for this guy. He seemed to be telegraphing that I got all the answers, that he answered all the questions right here before I put them before you. Now, he's maintained that he would have walked out of the office if Trump said, what would you do if Roe v. Wade came before you again? But that's something I hadn't seen before.
Well, no one ever accused Donald Trump of being subtle, and this is just a perfect example of that. Trump needed to shore up his conservative base. We all know that a big reason, I might call it an excuse, that many of my fellow Republicans voted for Donald Trump was precisely so men or women like Neil Gorsuch would be appointed to the bench or would be nominated to the bench. And so Trump had to double down. He had no choice but to double down and beat his chest and say, I'm handing over to you, or I'm going to nominate the most reliable conservative imaginable. So if you elect me president, this is what you can expect. And in fairness, that's what, that's what he's delivered.
You know, on the politics side, Dominic, I heard a lot of interesting conversations, including with a good friend of this program, Senator Blumenthal, Democrat from Connecticut. And he said, other people have said, he won't name their names, even Republicans, listen, give us this one, okay? Because this pick in effect, is replacing Justice Scalia, who was a conservative, constitutionalist, and everything else. It's one for one. Just keep the pot right. Fight on the next one. Now, he says no way, no how. If Democrats go to the wall against Gorsuch, which most people find him to be qualified, even if they get into some issues, I'll get into with Andrew in a second, on some of the decisions he's made and some of the dissenting and majority opinions he's given, they'll in effect trigger the nuclear option. Then it becomes a simple majority. Now, I've heard two schools of thought. They're going to do it anyway. This is when, not if.
Right.
Or do you live to fight another day and make it a fight over the next one, because you'll just be seen as obstruction if you try and say no to this one just on principle?
And that is the obstacle that Democrats, the hurdle that they must overcome. And frankly, the numbers are just not there, Richard, where even if you put off the fight now, and first of all, welcome back.
Thank
but
you.
even if you put off the fight now, you may find yourself in the same similar situation on the next one. You know, the one that would be perhaps a swing vote or whatever, since this is considered replacing Scalia. But even then, the Democrats don't have the numbers, as we all know at this table. So Democrats find themselves between a rock and a hard place. I watched this all day today. Gorsuch, whether you like him or not, and whether he completely evaded every question that was put before him, he was very polished. He came off very likable. I don't see how Democrats can stop this at all.
And he said two important things, I think. One is, no one's above the law, including the president, so if something came before me, I would be willing to do that. And he also said that if this president in any way, shape, or form tried to, in effect, make me pass the litmus test, I would have walked out of the office. That said, there was a couple of exchanges, including one where I saw that Senator Franken from Minnesota pressed him on, which was a decision that he gave the lone dissenting opinion and not only voted that way, but explained where a trucker, and I don't want to take 5 minutes to explain the whole case, but basically a trucker, his brakes froze in 14 below temperature. Called into the home office and says, guys, what are we going to do here? A trailer and everything else, dangerous when the brakes lock up there and he can't move, and you don't exactly want a rolling freight train coming down the highway. They say, don't worry, help's on the way. Well, after 3 of these phone calls and hours later, he lost all feeling in his feet. He believed up to his torso. Brother calls him, wakes him up out of his sleep, slurring his words, says, you got to get some help here. He basically left or attempted to leave. He was fired for it. Everybody else says you can't fire a guy for that. He's basically, you know, through no fault of his own, you're going to fire him. And the only way he wouldn't lose his job is if he died. Gorsuch found issue with that. And there's been a litany of other decisions where he's ruled pro-corporation versus individual. The feeling is these types of cases could be coming more and more in front of the court. Hobby Lobby, an example, as the beginning, not the end of that.
Yeah, and the exchange with Franken was an interesting one because it was one of the few times where Gorsuch actually went into depth on his thinking and challenged Franken about an exception to that rule and tried to explain why he ruled the way that he did. It was a little bit of a tough sell. Franken certainly wasn't buying it, but Gorsuch is relatively comfortable in his positioning there. There are a lot of corporate versus employee cases that would appear to be in the pipeline. And as you mentioned, Hobby Lobby is one of them that we've seen. And that's the approach that I was talking about with the professor about whether Gorsuch, and Democrats are trying to paint Gorsuch as being too cozy with business. I'm not sure if that's necessarily their strongest selling point. And I do have concerns that the more the Democrats try to argue Gorsuch on the merits, the more they actually validate him. And they make him seem like a jurist who belongs on the Supreme Court. They might be wise to sort of lay off those. I know they're trying to get a populist sense against Gorsuch, that, you know, the Bernie Sanders movement, you know, is workers over.
Well, let me ask you, as somebody who believes in strict constructions, okay? In the set of piece that Andrew put together, or in the interview, I'm sorry, that he did earlier, the question of states' rights. Are we as a country, if you read strictly, interpret the Constitution as written, you could go back to a day and age where different states could decide if couples of different races would be allowed to intermarry. Virginia Loving, that whole case. But if we go back to the time to say, well, you can do it in New York, but you can't do it in Virginia, pick 2 other states, are we comfortable going there? Because that's a literal interpretation of it.
Well, it is. I mean, that's That's a deep well you're asking me to jump into,
But
Richard.
isn't that
what
what
I
a
would say-
constitutionalist,
Well,
at the end of the day,
but-
it is black and white?
Yeah, but there are certainly certain things, especially insofar as commerce is concerned, where we have an interstate commerce clause in the Constitution that tries to keep all states equal under federal law, and I think with good reason. So yes, conservatives typically are in favor of devolution of rulemaking back to the states. I know I am in many cases, but certainly not in all cases. I'm not sure that a strict constructionist on the bench, and I don't know, I've never really done a comparison of this, but yes, they definitely tend to cede power and side with states when there is a question, and I think most conservatives would, but I'm not sure you would necessarily see a dramatic turn back to.
And we're going to have much more of this tomorrow. I have a bunch of attorneys around the table, but where this then goes to, and I agree, it takes a couple dots to be connected. But Bannon's whole argument of the deconstruction of the establishment, right, of the state here, that's where this would all go. Now, again, this is one seat, this is one judge, this is for one confirmation, but where this begins and ends is a fascinating question. I wish we had more time on it, but so much going on in our nation's capital. Coming up next, the House aiming to vote on health care this Thursday. In advance of that, President Trump, he's trying to whip up some yes votes. Will his pressure help put that over the top?